what I want to talk about today is that we all consume data, whether consciously or not. And what I want to talk about is how we've changed our narrative to use data to take meaningful action. So I'm going to talk about my experience in what is quite a risk-averse and heavily regulated environment. I personally think of data that we use for software delivery in two different ways. So firstly, you have your data that allows you to take meaningful action for your teams and customers, and then data that gives you the illusion of just that. So I'm hoping everyone here has seen The Matrix. The main character in The Matrix, Neo, gets the choice of a blue pill or a red pill. If he takes the blue pill, he gets to return for his life, he gets to believe whatever he wants to believe, and it's the choice of putting his head in the sand and being ignorant to what's really going on. If he takes the red pill, he faces an uncertain future, but the truth of what's really going on. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it also gives him the opportunity to take action. And we have this same choice with data. So we can take the blue pill and we can keep planning and estimating and working to deadlines that are unachievable, and we can believe the illusion of the estimated date. Or we can take a red pill and we can use data that represents truth, which is that software delivery is uncertain and we can't possibly know the outcome on day one. So I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes running through how we've been able to change the narrative with our teams and our stakeholders to ignite action, and also to stop using data that gives the illusion of certainty. So I'm Julie Starling. I currently work at Principality Building Society, which is a financial institution in Cardiff, Wales. So if there's any rugby fans amongst you, you might recognise the name because we sponsor the stadium in Cardiff. So the Building Society is around 160 years old. We have about 1,200 people in total who work for Principality, spread across our head office and our branch network. So from a delivery perspective, we're made up of 3 value streams with a total of 12 delivery teams. So we've got some Scrum teams, some Scrum with Kanban, some Kanban in there. And we also have a platforms and engineering team. So I'm the practice manager for Agile delivery, which means I get to coach, support and help grow the Agile professionals in my team and help them to grow knowledge and skills in their teams and the wider organisation. So I've been working alongside or in software delivery for over 15 years now. I'm just really passionate about improving efficiency in teams. So if we just go back to our blue pill and red pill data, I'm going to share where we were and where we are now. So before we started our journey down the rabbit hole, we used to work on big programs and projects, and we would have planning days, and we spend an awful lot of time estimating and planning. But because of this, we were often chasing deadlines. Estimates, they're just a best guess with the information you have at the time. So because of that, we were often late. And being late meant that we would often be trying to go faster without knowing why we'd not hit the deadline in the first place. And we were solving symptoms and not problems. We tried to get better at estimating, we'd work overtime, we'd create technical debt. We were trying to solve the symptom, which was not hitting a deadline, rather than the reason that those deadlines were not realistic. So as we fast forward nearly 5 years now, and we're trying to take a more probabilistic approach to deliveries. We use probabilistic forecasting, we have regular conversations about the action we might want to take, and that's based on the current data. We're now mitigating risk before it gets a chance to manifest itself, and we're able to solve problems instead of symptoms. So on top of probabilistic forecasting, we're also using flow data and DORA metrics to help us continuously improve. So I'm going to run through these 5 points and examples of how this has played out for us. We're far from perfect, we're still on our journey, so I'm going to talk about what we've done as well as what we're going to do next. So if I just start by talking about probabilistic forecasting, what I mean by this and how we've used it. So forecasting in any guise, which could be anything from economics to weather, but in our case software delivery, means that someone's using past and present data to make predictions about the future. And in order to get to how we use probabilistic forecasting, I just want to first talk a little bit about being late and what that means for software delivery. So when you're delivering software delivery, if you're late, it means you've mismanaged expectations. For you to be late, someone was expecting something certain by a certain date, which means you've probably been planning for certainty in an uncertain world. So being late means that we've lost the opportunity to manage risk. It's choices that people never got to make, It's likely something unexpected happened along the way, and either you didn't manage that expectation or you didn't do anything about it. And with the wrong data, it could be that you just didn't see that happening. Lateness is damaging to culture. It grinds people down. If you're regularly late, it doesn't mean anything at all. And the urgency people think that they get from deadlines goes away the more regularly you're late, because it's just not sustainable. Finally, it's a driver for unsustainable behaviours. It's where we start doing overtime, cutting corners, and building up technical debt. So, whilst this slide is a little bit flippant, I couldn't resist the opportunity to quote Douglas Adams, big fan. As I've mentioned already, we are a highly regulated financial institution, so dates really do matter to us. We don't always have the luxury of being able to deliver when we want to. We generally have a mix of work, so we have some regulatory work and some more product-based work, and we're able to use this approach for both types of work. Yeah, and I will reiterate, we're not perfect. There are times where we need to check ourselves and make sure we're not falling back into old ways of working. And it's also more difficult with some stakeholders than others, and I'll get onto that in a bit. So, plans and estimates are often done at the beginning of a delivery when we know the least about what needs to be done. They're also sometimes redone throughout the delivery at great time expense. They use very certain language, and they're calculated based on experience and opinions. And this is the type of thing you'll see, so quite definite language, maybe a random amount of contingency thrown in, whereas probabilistic forecasts are made up of a probability and a range. So, for example, they look a little bit more like this. So in this example, the percentage is our probability. And this needs to be whatever your business decides is right for them. Because if you think about it, if you're saying there's an 85% chance of doing something, you're also saying there's a 15% chance that that's not going to be the case. But Principality, we use 85%. There's no right or wrong. This is just what we've chosen. So the range part of that statement is represented either by the number of items or the time frame. So if you want a date, then the range is on how much can be done in that time. And if you want scope, then the range is when that's likely to be done. It's really important to note, though, that we aren't given a definite date. So a word of warning, and something I've experienced time and time again, is when you start using these, people will just see the date and they'll ignore the probability and range. And this forms part of the education that's needed alongside this. And I'll get onto that in a little bit and how that looks for us. So finally, we need to do this continuously. So not every few weeks, not every few months. We need to be doing this daily or worst case weekly. So sounds all great. How do you get started? So you need the cycle time of 10 or more work items that were done by the same team, and the future work needs to look like the past work, and that's it. So when I say cycle time, this is just whatever start and end point you choose for your system. When I say the same team, I mean, we don't use one team's data to forecast for another team. When I say the future needs to look like the past, I mean, we can't fundamentally change the shape of the work and use the same data. So if we took a different approach to shaping work, or we completely changed the tech stack we were using, we couldn't then use that previous data. But since we only need about 10 items to get started, if that happens, then we never have to wait long to be able to forecast. So you can use this data to run a Monte Carlo simulation. I also, obviously, because I'm on this webinar, use ActionableAgile to do this, but you don't have to, but I don't see why you wouldn't. So it accepts spreadsheet data, or we can integrate with DORA, Azure DevOps, a bunch of others as well, I believe. I'm not going to go into the mechanics of Monte Carlo forecasting, but I will provide resources at the end that'll help you with that. However, what you do need to know about this is that Monte Carlo simulations is used in many industries, from economics to climate change. And when we run our simulation in ActionableAgile, it runs a simulation on your data 10,000 times or more. So when we are trying to determine when something will be completed, and we say there's an 85% likely it will be completed on the date of before, what we're saying is out of those thousands and thousands of simulations that will run over your data, 85% of them were completed by a date or before. Like I said, I'm not going to go any more into the mechanics than that. However, if you do want to talk about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this for hours. So the difference between probabilistic forecasting and estimates is that probabilistic forecasts are based on real data and not opinions or guesses. So we find there's no drain on our delivery teams to create these. We generate them in seconds, and it allows us to be approximately right rather than exactly wrong. So this little calendar we get out of ActionableAgile, and we find that really useful when we're communicating with our stakeholders. So when we create estimates, like there's so much we used to miss, and people generally tend to be optimists. We forget about the cost of context switching. We sometimes think in effort and not elapsed time. We don't need to take into account things like meetings or disruptions, but using real data gets around all this because it's already baked in. As per Hofstede's law as well, it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstede's law, which is why it's really unreliable for us to try and predict rather than using real data. As per weather forecasting, weather forecasts move daily based on what's going on at the time. And we found understanding that this is also the nature of software delivery is really key. So using forecasts doesn't mean you no longer have a date. It means you now have more information than you ever had before. And more importantly, you never had the date anyway. It was an illusion. It's that blue pill data I'm talking about. So understanding you never had the date anyway is half the battle, especially when you're trying to share this with stakeholders and other people. So at the start, I mentioned we take a probabilistic approach and we have continuous conversations. So I'm about to run through a real example, which will hopefully demonstrate that using the probabilistic approach alongside continuous conversations gives us the earliest possible opportunity to take meaningful action. So I'm just going to show you how this played out with a team from 12 months ago. So again, as I say, this is a real example. This was a prototype team who were trying out new ways of working, and they had a number of important features that we needed to deliver. So what you're going to see is that bottom line is going to represent time passing. So the more right we go, the more forward in the future we're going. So we're going to start by representing the amount of work left to do with a red line. And when this line goes up, the amount of work left to do with increased. And when this line goes down, the amount of work left to do with decreased. So here we are, day one, the team started work. The line is trending down, so you can see the number of items left to deliver is decreasing as you'd expect. So I'm about to introduce the second line to this chart now in green. And this line is going to represent the forecasted range of dates for the number of items left. So if that line goes up, it means our forecasted date range is moving out. And if the line goes down, it means our forecasted date range is coming in. So here you'll notice as well that this green line doesn't start at the same date as the red line. And that's because this is a prototype type team we spun up to test new ways of working and get some specific features over the line. So we needed to wait to get enough data to start the forecasting. So as I mentioned on the other slide, we needed 10 or more items to get started. So the forecasted date range corresponds to the work remaining at the time. So this date range highlighted here is the amount of, is based on these sort of work items left at that date. This forecasted date range is generated using all the data we've collected up until this point. So remember, our blue line goes up, the date range is going out, the blue line comes down, our date range is coming in. So the team keeps working, and as you can see, the number of stories we have left is coming down, and the forecast is remaining pretty stable. And this means our team is churning through work, and we haven't come across anything unexpected yet. Then what happened was we saw the backlog remaining flat, so no items were being delivered and our forecasted date range started moving out. And this is what I mean when I say it gave us the earliest possible opportunity to take action. So because of this movement, we could have a conversation about what was happening and we could take action. So what was happening was someone had asked the team to help out with a production issue, and being the wonderfully helpful group of people that they were, they all just jumped onto this production issue. When we could see the impact of this, we could have a conversation and we could understand that actually this was derailing this work, and the production issue wasn't actually more important than what was going on here. So we were then able to find a more suitable home for that work, and the team were able to resume what they were doing before. So once that happened, we stabilised the forecast again, and the number of work items began to reduce. However, let's have a look at what's just happened here. So our range of dates is now later than it was before this incident, and we know the exact reason for this. This information can be communicated at the earliest possible opportunity, and it also now enables us to have conversations about, is there anything we want to do to try and pull this date range in? So is there scope we can cut? Is there something another team could pick up? Do we need to change our ways of working a little bit? And it's important to note that, whilst the forecasted date ranges moved back a little bit, it didn't move back as much as it would have if we hadn't have caught this. And we also know why it happened. And that saves a lot of frustration later on in the delivery. So we were able to manage those expectations and talk about our options going forward. So this scenario shows that we can use probabilistic forecasting to solve problems when they come along. It also gives us the opportunity to mitigate risk. So the next thing that happens is, I'm sure you've all experienced this, is whilst you're in there, is a little bit more scope that needs doing. And when this came in, obviously our backlog size increased. We were able to forecast the impact of this, and this is what it looked like. So quite predictable, right? So we put more scope in, and the forecasted date ranges later. However, we were able to simulate this for our stakeholders and understand the actual impact without wasting time estimating. And it also stops us from just absorbing work and trying to get it all done by a date that was estimated before we had this information. So it allowed us to mitigate this risk. So the scenario shows that we can use probabilistic forecasting to solve problems when they come along. And when I mentioned on the first slide that we now solve problems or symptoms, this is exactly what I meant. So we're now able to see what was causing the shift in delivery expectations and solve that, rather than much later down the line trying to solve the problem of not hitting a date and not really knowing why that ever happened. So we've gone from unrealistic certainty-based planning to actually being able to have actions and choices in an uncertain landscape. And we're also able to help the team out and make strategic decisions. So when extra work finds its way into a team and you're planning uncertainty, so the team can choose to either absorb the work or re-estimate. And when they re-estimate, that's a pretty wasteful exercise. It increases context switching and takes a lot of time. And when we forecast, we can show the impact of this without wasting time. And remember, this takes seconds to generate. And instead of reporting lateness to stakeholders, we're giving them choices. And it means they can't be surprised when a date range goes out and their expectations have been managed. So previous to using this data, for us, it wouldn't have been unheard of for us to just absorb the work at these key points. And then the reasons for later delivery would never have been 100% certain, and it just leaves our stakeholders frustrated and demotivated in that scenario. So I do need to talk about the people side of this. So I spent a lot of time explaining the new data we were using, and those discussions were tailored depending on the audience I was talking to. An important note here is education is a continuous activity too. So when you explain this concept of probabilistic forecasting, being able to take action for the future, being able to mitigate risk, it's really easy to get people nodding and get agreement. However, when you start doing this and forecasted date ranges start moving around, people start to get a little bit nervous because they're used to having a date and they feel like it's been taken away from them. And the key here I found is to get people to realise they never had that date anyway, they just thought they did. So when a forecast changes or moves, we haven't lost the delivery date, we've gained actionable information. So I spent a lot of time walking through this with teams, but also heads of departments, even our COO, and some of the non-exec directors at the time when we first started introducing this. But that's not enough. So we need to keep educating as these scenarios are playing out. So people revert to what they're comfortable with in times of stress, and they keep seeking the impossible certainty. And we need to keep demonstrating that the power this data gives us, and it's actually given us more, not less. So yeah, the concepts of forecasting were explained to the teams and stakeholders. What I was also able to do with the teams is to show that just by collecting the cycle time for the forecasting, We were also capturing flow metrics that could help us continuously improve and become more efficient and deliver more value and take more action every day that would make a meaningful difference to how we were delivering and ultimately our customers. So, as we've explained, we were capturing cycle time. So, if you imagine each one of these green dots is a user story that we're measuring cycle time for. So for any story that has a start date but not an end date, we also know how old it is. And this is item age. It's a really, really useful metric to keep an eye on in real time. So if you're looking at the age of your non-closed work items on a daily basis, you know to focus attention on the oldest items first. And this has a huge impact on your cycle time, but I'll talk about this in a few slides' time with a real example. Additionally, all the items that have a start date but no end date help us to know how much work we have in progress at any given time. And by capturing the end date, we also know the rate at which we're delivering, so we know our throughput number. So I'll take this to a real example now, where education around flow metrics and the benefits of capturing cycle time has helped us to take action. So let's look at this graph now. So this is an example I had with the team when we first started using the data this way. So each of these dots represents a completed work item, which for us was a user story. For each dot, the bottom axis shows the date it was delivered, and the left axis shows how many days it took to complete. So we went into a retrospective as a team. We talked about this data with the team. We could see that our cycle times were longer than our sprint length. So based on the data we were already capturing, I proposed that we could try limiting how much work we had in progress. The team agreed to this, and we ran this as an experiment for a few sprints. So after we'd been running this experiment, we were back in another retrospective, and the team were feeling like they weren't doing as much work. They felt like they were, less pressured. I think breaking the habit of like starting multiple items and context switching felt really unusual, and people weren't used to it. But then we looked at the data, and as you can see, we actually reduced the cycle time of all our items, and we also increased our throughput. This is one example of where we use this data in an actionable way. So this chart also helps us to do single item forecasting and set a service level expectation for the team. So this is exactly the same chart, exactly the same example as I just showed you. However, if you'll notice on the right hand side, we have percentile lines. So if we just look at this 85% line here, what this is telling us is that of all the items completed under this line, that's 85% of them under the line, sorry. And this means we could communicate a single item forecast based on our past data. And this, we would communicate to stakeholders that we have an 85% chance of delivering a single user story in 21 days or less. And when we worked in the office, this is something we'd have up on our physical boards so that everyone knew what our SLE was. And because we knew our item age as well, we knew that when an item was creeping towards this SLE line, we should probably be taking some action. So as I mentioned earlier, item age is really, really useful. And in this example, we also focused on item age on a daily basis. So by looking at how close an item was to our SLE, it helped the team focus and take action to complete those work items before it had a negative effect on SLE. So this helps us focus on oldest item first, which is really important for becoming predictable. So, however, we needed to make sure that we were using the right data set when communicating our single item forecasts. So if we take the same graph and we look at the SLE before our new work in progress limit was set, you can see there was an 85% chance of delivering a work item in 25 days or less. If we look at this section of the graph after the ways of working change, we can now see it's an 85% chance of delivering a work item in 7 days or less, which is a huge improvement, right? But once we were sure that this new data set was consistent over time, we then started using this going forward. So it's really important we're using the right data sets when we're forecasting. So we were also able to capture this as a sprintly piece of information to help drive continuous improvement. And it's just really useful for the team to see progress that we're making by changing ways of working, but also for communicating out to other people. So as well as demonstrating progress, one of the bonuses for this scatter plot data that we found was that we were able to show teams and stakeholders how the previous estimation models were an illusion, and they were that blue pill data I was talking about. And I'll go through this in the next slide. So what we've got here is exactly the same graph. When we started using this data, we were still using story points to estimate alongside this. So I was able to color code each of the user stories to represent the story point value assigned to it before the work had started. So if we look at the pale blue dots, these are all estimated at 3 points. As you can see, they vary from 1 day to even 60 days in one case. Even after the WIP limit, the variance is between 1 and nearly 10 days. There is no correlation between story points and days. And story points, they were never meant to equate to time anyway. However, that's what people use as a basis to plan their sprints and their deliveries. So it's a bit bizarre. This isn't a team who report estimates. In my experience, this is how it looks time and time again across many different teams with many different levels of maturity. It's also the case whether you estimate in hours, days, or points. This is an exercise I'd encourage you to do with all your teams. I am quite confident that whether you're estimating in points or hours or however else you do it, it'll show that your estimates aren't accurate. And we need to stop treating estimates with certainty or stop using them altogether, which will save a lot of time and frustration. What I will say is we still have some teams that use story points. I'm not here to hate on story points. I can see that sometimes they can be helpful with conversations, but I strongly believe that they should not be used for planning and definitely not be used for setting expectations. I do appreciate it's quite a hard habit to break sometimes. My only suggestion here is that we keep using data to show that they're not adding any value and that it's actually a wasteful activity. So not doing estimates means your team can focus on the value add work, and they have to do less context switching, which is great. And then finally, for our flow data, we look at our throughput. So this green line is our trend line, which represents how much we were delivering on a daily basis. So this is an example we had at the start of using this type of data. And as we were changing our ways of working, we were making lots of those types of changes, and we were using this data more regularly. And it showed the positive effect that it was having, and we were able to deliver more over time. And this is, again, useful for communicating to stakeholders. But what I will say is this line doesn't always go up for us. And when it doesn't, we're able to have a conversation about why this is happening, and then again, take meaningful action. Just like in the example I showed you with the Monte Carlo forecast over time, when this changes and it's not going in the direction that we'd hope or expect, then we get opportunity to take action. So I've just run through how we've used probabilistic forecasting, flow metrics, continuous conversations to mitigate risk and solve problems, and then how to use them to take meaningful action before it's too late. The benefit of this has been we've had the earliest possible opportunity to take action, we've made strategic decisions, but it also took a lot of education, and it still does. We've also learned that this takes a lot of time. So my journey with this started by going to a conference where I saw Dan Vacanti do a talk on forecasting. My mind was blown by that, and I knew this was something we needed to start doing. I then booked onto this metrics course and came back to Principality buzzing with ideas of how we can use this data to help us. That was about 4 or 5 years ago now. And we started this off with 1 or 2 teams building enough data to start sharing. And then it spread to the entire program we were on, which was made up of 4 delivery teams. Today, we use probabilistic forecasting across all our value streams, but that didn't happen overnight. And we're still not as consistent as we could be with it either. What we did find, though, was getting started really helped with adoption. So when I started doing this, another program was interested in what I was doing. They could see what I was doing and asked me to come over and sort of talk to them a bit about it. So Scrum Master was like, yeah, come have a look at our data, see what we can do, and just help them run one and share a bit about how it works. So I did this. We ran a forecast. The forecast came out as 80% to 5% likely, predicted on or before a date that was 6 months later than the date the team had estimated. So based on this fact, the forecast was rejected as inaccurate by the team, the project manager, the stakeholders, didn't want to forecast. So they kept going with their traditional ways of planning and estimating. They were late. In fact, they delivered within a few weeks of the forecasted date. And on this occasion, they chose to put their head in their sand and ignore the forecast. They chose to believe the illusion instead of the uncomfortable truth. So the teams who were involved in this do now use forecasting. And just to reiterate, it takes time, and just getting started can help other people adopt it. So even if that adoption is rejected to start with and isn't taken up straight away, just getting started gives the data the opportunity to prove itself as useful. So I talked a bit about how we've got here, and now we've taken our red pill. We are well and truly down the rabbit hole. We now take a more data-driven approach to delivery, and we realise that whilst we're better now than we ever have been before, in certain areas we have non-optimal delivery methods. So particularly what we've branded as our path to live, which is the ways of working, the technical path, the culture, the processes involved in getting our work into the hands of our customers. So we want to keep using data in a meaningful way, and our aspirations align very closely to the investigation conducted by the DORA research programme. So we want to use a data-driven approach to improving capabilities and practices for the benefit of our organisation, but ultimately our customers. And yeah, we found that our desires really align with what DORA have to offer. So DORA represents over 7 years of research and data from over 32,000 professionals all over the world. It provides an independent view into practices and capabilities that drive high performance in technology and culture. And it provides us with guidance and metrics we can use to monitor our current state and our improvements over time. So if anyone here hasn't had a look at this, I'd really recommend doing the quick check tool. There's a link down there. If you go on the website, you can see how you compare to the rest of the industry, and it'll give you some tips to get started. So our approach to this has been to work with the teams to set a direction and then define the data that's going to help us on this journey. So our agreed direction is that we're able to deliver whenever we want to, and we always want to be improving our efficiency and reducing any friction to do this. And we want to be doing it in a safe way. So the DevOps research assessment uses 4 key DORA metrics, and we're using this to understand our capabilities and practices and how we compare to industry. So DORA actually defines lead time as code commit to deployed in production. However, we're currently capturing the time it takes from a user story meeting our definition of done to being delivered to a customer, and that's currently how we're measuring lead time. Ideally, we want to do it from code commit to delivered. However, we are a 160-year-old company, so we have a mix of really new tech, but also some really legacy tech in there too, which makes some of that information a little bit trickier to capture right now. But that's for the future, and that is where we intend to go. But right here, right now, we're doing definition of done to delivered. So by knowing our lead time, we also know how often we're delivering, which is very similar to throughput when we talk about flow metrics. And we also capture how often a change causes a failure, as well as how quickly we're able to restore service when users are impacted. So we also use ActionableAgile for our lead time data in the same way as we do cycle time. And that's really starting to give us some useful information where we can improve. We use the scatter plot, as I shared with you earlier, for single item forecasting. And this has highlighted to us patterns such as batching of work, time between deliveries. And we're also able to look at our service level expectations for our lead times. And this has given us data that we can take action with. So there is an important healthy tension between these 4 figures for us too. So we don't want to be reducing our lead time, but as a result, increase our change failure rate. So it's really important we're having continuous conversations about these figures and that we can look at them collectively, not individually. So where we are now, so we've set the direction, we've defined what data we're going to use. We then knew we needed to understand a little bit more about the current state of our system. The teams had spent time mapping out and understanding the path to live, including any waste and wait times. And they then started looking at opportunities to improve based on this data. We were really keen to ensure that we were focusing our efforts where they would have the biggest impact on the system and on our DORA metrics. So if you take this funnel as an example of, and just imagine this is our system, so it will only ever output one widget per day due to our bottleneck at C. So if we spend time automating or adjusting our ways of working at any of the sort of A, B or D sections, our customers aren't going to see any extra value and our DORA metrics aren't going to change either. So as teams, we looked at our path to live, we identified our bottlenecks, and we came up with opportunities to solve this, and we hypothesized on how each of these opportunities would impact our DORA metrics. By doing this, we were then able to prioritize those opportunities. And now, the stage we're at right now is we're implementing those opportunities and measuring as we go. So we'll look at how the changes implemented affect our DORA metrics and the bottlenecks in our system. And then we keep cycling through this model to understand what the current state is, what the opportunities we have to take meaningful action are, and then putting them into place. So this is going to be a continuous cycle for us, using data to take the most meaningful action for our organisation and our customers. So I've walked through these 5 points, so describing where we've come from, but also where we are now. We are still on our journey, but we do use probabilistic forecasting because software delivery isn't certain, so we know we need to stop treating it like it is. We are having continuous conversations, so we're managing expectations, we're not falling victim to the illusion of the estimated date, and we're also avoiding the negative consequences of being late. We mitigate risk because we're not waiting to be late to take action, which means we're solving problems and not symptoms. We use our probabilistic forecasting alongside flow and DORA data to drive meaningful action at the right time rather than corrective action when it's too late. So thank you for staying with me. Hopefully I've shown you that the future is uncertain, and for the benefit of our teams and our stakeholders and our customers, we need to make sure we're using data that is driving conversations and meaningful action, because that's just better for everyone. And remember, it's better to be approximately right than exactly wrong. So here are some of the resources I've used over the past few years. If you're looking how to get started with doing this and or using ActionableAgile, I'd recommend the 2 books by Dan Vacanti or the talk by Julia, which is the second one down. The talk that got me into all of this is that YouTube link at the top by Dan Vacanti. So if you're interested, I guess now's the time to do a screen grab. And yeah, just thank you.